The Sonic the Hedgehog series is really funny because you can go from having some of the best boss battles in any video game ever to some of the absolute worst you've ever seen in your life.
Oh no! Oh no! Oh no!
Which, hey, is to be expected. I mean, the franchise has seen its fair share of highs and lows throughout the years. But today, I want to focus on the bad. Why? Because I love being a hater. I love waking up early just so I can have extra time to be a hater. Welcome to chaomix, and these are the hilariously bad boss fights of the Sonic the Hedgehog series. In general, boss fights are supposed to be the decisive battleground where all of your skill and knowledge of everything you've learned up until that point is put to the test. They're not only meant to challenge you as a player, but also inject a burst of tension into the narrative. A well-made boss fight should leave you on the edge of your seat, heart pounding as you strategize and adapt to overcome whatever foe stands in your way. The ideal boss fight excels in all of these aspects, but obviously this isn't always going to be the case, especially with certain Sonic games. So what exactly makes for a bad boss fight? A bad boss fight, in my books at least, can be a result of any mix of things. From bad attack pattern design, lack of challenge, overly excessive challenge, or even underwhelming narrative impact. Today we're going over the worst of the Sonic series. And we're not just going over bad boss fights, we're going over the hilariously bad boss fights. Boss battles that are so bad that they become memorable for all of the wrong reasons. So without further ado, let's take a deep dive into what I think are the most hilariously bad boss fights in all of Sonic. Sonic Adventure is one of my favorite games of all time. If you've been subscribed to me for longer than like 2 seconds, you'd probably know this. And hey, if you aren't subscribed, it's never too late. It would help me out tremendously if you did, and even more if you left a like on this video. It only takes a second of your time and is actually the best thing you can do to support my channel so I can keep making these kinds of videos. Anyways, I love Sonic Adventure with all of my heart, but my god, every single one of the rival boss fights is absolute dog water. Sonic Adventure 1 has 6 main playable characters, each with their own separate stories that take place around the same time and the same places. Because of this, characters' paths will sometimes interweave, and due to the chaotic circumstances, get it, like chaos? Okay, I'll stop now. Because of the hectic circumstances, not everyone is always on the same page and they'll occasionally end up fighting each other. Because what better way to clear up a simple misunderstanding than socking them a few in the face? Forget to replace the toilet paper roll? That's a boss fight. Accidentally took someone else's coffee at Starbucks? Yep, that's another boss fight. It's honestly a miracle anyone in Sonic's world has time for actual conversations.
I heard you!
But every one of these fights are prime examples of how not to design a boss fight. They literally fail in every single department I mentioned previously. First, there is absolutely zero challenge. You'd be lucky if you even see any of these guys pull off a single attack because they're over before you know it. For instance, I bet literally 0 of you knew that Knuckles had more than 1 attack in his boss fight. When he has 3 HP, Knuckles does a simple 3-punch combo, but when you bring him down to 2 HP, he adds in a roll attack. And when he's on his last hit, he'll only do a glide attack. It's insane because I literally went 25 years of my life without knowing any of these things until digging around this fight for this video. That's how absurdly quick and easy these fights are. It only takes 3 hits to defeat them, and they have absolutely 0 defensive options against the player besides the second or 2 of invincibility frames they get after being attacked. This means you can just go up and immediately attack, wait for them to get back up, and then rinse and repeat. If they do somehow manage to get an attack out, it's the most pathetic thing you'll ever see. The AI is so under-equipped to deal with a player that you just start to feel bad for them. It's gone to the point where I'm considering opening a GoFundMe for Knuckles. All donations will go towards getting these guys a personal trainer, so maybe one day they'll stand a chance.
Oh no!
Seriously, you'd have to actually go out of your way to lose these. You're honestly more likely to get a paper cut from the game manual than to lose these battles. They have no narrative impact either because it's not really clear who actually canonically wins. It just depends on who you're playing as at the time. For instance, Sonic seems to win against Knuckles when playing through Sonic's story, but then Knuckles seems to win when playing his story. Not only does it not make any sense, but there's 0 narrative weight to these fights when you know at the end of the day it doesn't really matter. These fights are really bad, and it's every single one of them too, not even just a select few. Sonic Adventure does a lot right, but these rival fights are definitely not one of those things. They do learn their lesson for the most part by the sequel, which to its credit has actual design to each boss's attacks and defense patterns. It feels like you're fighting against an actual opponent with a functional frontal lobe instead of a limp punching bag. Sure, they're not anything absolutely mind-blowing, but they're definitely serviceable enough to get them out of the hilariously bad list of boss fights, that's for sure. Sorry, Sonic Adventure 1. Next up on our list of hilariously bad boss fights are the team battles from Sonic Heroes. Listen, I'm a huge Sonic Heroes defender. It's #1 soldier, if you will. I think it's actually a brilliant game with a really smart and strategic approach to its game design by utilizing the 3 team members in a rock, paper, scissors trichotomy. In general, speed beats fly, fly beats power, and power beats speed. It's a really fun and engaging system that keeps the player on their toes, having to constantly adapt by switching to the best suited party member. This would apply to the team battles too, which is really cool. Except, there's one problem. What the fuck is even happening here? These are some of the most chaotic battles I've ever experienced in any game. Sure, you might think you've got the upper hand by knowing the rock, paper, scissors flowchart I just explained, but good luck actually applying it because deciphering what's even going on in this absolute clusterfuck is nearly impossible. This is the equivalent of those cartoon dust clouds that appear during a fight when you just see their arms and legs flailing out. I mean, there's 6 different characters on screen here and it gets confusing to tell who's who. The goal of these team battles is to knock all 3 opponent players out of bounds. Once a character gets knocked out, they get sent to gay baby jail and can't be used. The only way to revive your party is to use a team blast, which is actually kinda neat except for when the other team does it. But getting any of your own characters KO'd is what's gonna totally mess up your rock, paper, scissors flowchart. Because if you don't have the correct counter to your opponent, you're just shit out of luck. And you can't really control the party members you aren't playing as, and we all know how smart the team AI is in this game. They're, not. Also, the reason each team ends up fighting each other usually makes no sense. For instance, the first team battle when playing as Team Sonic is against Team Rose. Like, why would these guys ever fight each other? They have a literal child on their team. I mean, I guess now we know why Sonic is perfectly okay with punching a toddler in the face in Sonic Frontiers. Like, the reason Team Sonic and Rose are fighting is because Amy's up to her old antics trying to get with Sonic. So obviously, the only solution is to just chuck her off a 200-foot tall skyscraper. Thank you, Sonic. Very cool. Listen, for as bad as the adventure rival battles were, at least they tried to properly explain why they were fighting. Heroes doesn't even try. Man, I love this game, but these fights are embarrassing. The entirety of Sonic 06 is infamous, but arguably the single most infamous part has to be the Silver boss battle. There's actually 2 of them in the game, one when playing as Sonic and another when you play through Shadow's story. They're both pretty terrible, but Sonic has it especially bad. After rescuing Princess Elise and escorting her back to Soliana, Sonic gets confronted by Silver, who believes him to be the Iblis Trigger, the one responsible for awakening Iblis, a fiery monster who would lay waste to his world in the future. Alright, at least we have a clear motive for why this fight is even happening. But that's about the only good thing I'm going to be praising this boss fight for. During this fight, Sonic and Silver battle in this open area of the city, filled with a ton of tables and chairs that Silver can use to chuck at Sonic with his telekinetic powers. Sounds awesome on paper, but in execution, yeah, that's kind of the theme of this whole game. Everyone knows Sonic 06 is a broken mess, but honestly, you don't have to look any further than this fight to see why. Getting anywhere near Silver will have him lock you into a telekinetic hold, where he'll then chuck you backwards until you hit something. Thing is, if he corners you against a wall with this, he can essentially stun lock you, beating our beloved Blue Rat against a wall to death. And that's if you're lucky. Worst case, he'll put you in a position where the ring that you spit out has nowhere to go except back into you, making it so that you keep collecting the same ring over and over again and can't die. Literally soft locking you and forcing you to reset the game. No, it's awesome. It's the most well-designed boss in the entire series. This is fine. Oh yeah, I didn't mention the fact that there's a chance for him to literally chuck you through the invisible wall over here, launching you into the stratosphere. And you know how I said you get chucked backwards until you hit something? Well, there's nothing out here to get hit by, so you just get soft locked out of bounds, hurling into space forever. This fight is genuinely terrifying because of how wrong it could potentially go. But if you know about all of this, just keep your distance and play it cool, the fight is actually pretty easy. You just have to play keep away until Silver becomes vulnerable, then you can go in for an attack. But I swear, I see God every time I get grabbed by Silver. My life flashes before my eyes, and I get the cold sweats. Not a good time, 0 out of 10, would not recommend. Sonic CD is a very strange game, and this definitely applies to a lot of its boss battles. It's not all of them, but there's a pretty large handful of bosses from this game that absolutely perplex me. There's a lot of bosses that only take 1 hit to take down. It's so strange. Like, why bother designing all this if they're just gonna go down so easily? Like the egg bubble, which is protected by a ring of bubbles. All you have to do is jump into its bubbles to absorb them and expose the boss. Once you hit it, it's dead. Or the egg tilter, which is above a little pinball table. Once you manage to get up to him, which can either be a little tricky or extremely easy if you're lucky enough, the boss itself basically instantly dies when confronted. Or how about the egg conveyor? This boss has Sonic run in place on a treadmill where you just kind of have to survive for a certain amount of time and then you can get your 1 hit and kill the boss. These have to be the most consistently underwhelming boss fights in any Sonic game. Such a silly little game. I wish I saw what everyone else sees in Sonic Colors. I mean, the game is fun enough, but I'll never be able to get over how bad the writing and dialogue were and how it just gets every character's personality wrong. But before I get sidetracked with a huge rant, let's talk about a hilariously bad boss that comes from this game. To be honest, most of Sonic Colors' bosses are pretty decent. I mean, they're apparently so good that they all get reused a second time throughout the game, usually the second time having extra phases, added challenge, and more health. But it's the first go-around with the very first boss, the Rotatatron, that is hilariously bad. This has got to be one of the most underwhelming bosses in the entire series. He's this hulking machine with a ton of crazy rotating platforms you'd think you'd need to utilize to get up to him. But in reality, you can just lightly run up the wall, get some height, jump towards him, and homing attack without even touching a platform. The worst part is that it potentially only takes 2 hits to defeat this thing if you use the laser wisp for the second attack. This is a fight you can literally win in 15 seconds. You'll likely spend more time watching it explode than actually fighting it. Luckily, the second time you fight this boss is a lot more challenging, but I really feel like that should have been the baseline and they should have upped the challenge from there. I mean, even Knuckles in Sonic Adventure took more hits than this guy. I get it's the first boss, but like, come on. Sonic Colors is never beating the made for babies allegations, I'm so sorry. Sonic Generations is probably in my top 3 Sonic games of all time. It's a blast from start to finish and such a joy to go through all these iconic levels with a more modern paint job. But oh boy, that final boss though. Time Eater is the main antagonist that classic and modern Sonic team up to defeat at the end of the game. So yeah, this is a Super Sonic controlled boss fight. These are supposed to be, peak. But this is far from peak. Using the main gimmick of the game, you switch between 2D and 3D to chase the Time Eater as it switches planes. Most of the fight is spent just moving towards it, not really doing much. It's a huge weight fest as you inch closer and closer until you can finally get in an attack. It's not particularly hard, but also not overly easy. The biggest offense is honestly it's just really boring, and that's the last thing a supersonic boss fight should be. I think the main reason this entry is on the list is because supersonic boss fights have a pretty high bar to clear, so when it turns out to be mediocre, it's extra bad. The original ending of Sonic Frontiers was extremely controversial. When you look at it for what it is, the end was essentially a reskin of the hacking minigame. It's a bullet hell similar to Ikaruga. Don't get me wrong, it's really fun, but like, for the final boss of the game, it was a bit tone deaf. This is one of those bosses where the design is actually pretty nice and there's actually quite a bit of challenge. It definitely took me quite a few tries to get down, but it just doesn't fit here, man. Oh, and depending on what difficulty you're playing on, this boss fight can range from extremely hard to literally non-existent. Yeah, on easy mode, you don't even go through this bullet hell section, you just have a couple of QuickTime events. It's insane. I remember talking to someone about the final boss and they had no idea what I was talking about because they played on easy mode and I was on hard mode. And it probably says something that the Final Horizon expansion opted to can this boss entirely. What a bizarre choice and anticlimactic way to end an otherwise pretty awesome game. There seems to be this new trend of making bosses extremely hard in recent Sonic games. The Final Horizon DLC had some really difficult fights, especially with the Master King Coco Trials, and Sonic Superstars has some equally tough battles, especially towards the end of the game. These bosses have this insane, unprecedented difficulty spike and lead to some of the most frustrating fights in the entire series. They're absolutely brutal, it's straight up masochism. Like, Sonic Team heard fans complain that the games were too easy and just overshot in the other direction and made a lot of these recent boss battles nearly impossible. Personally, I love a good challenge. I actually found a lot of enjoyment grinding out a lot of these boss battles. So maybe I am a bit masochistic, but even I can recognize that these bosses have no business being as hard as they are. The Master King Coco Trials are insanely difficult for a few reasons. First, you have a collective pool of 400 rings that you need to maintain over the course of all 3 Titan fights. And especially Wyvern loves to waste your time with lengthy animations before attacking. And second, your window for pulling off a successful parry is extremely minuscule, getting smaller and smaller the harder the difficulty you're playing on. I played on hard mode and was too stubborn to change the difficulty, so the parry window was only a few frames at best. I heard that they patched this to make it more lenient, but man, Sonic Team was definitely on something when they made these revamped boss fights for the DLC. As for Sonic Superstars, the last 3 boss fights are all brutal, and only get more difficult as they go on. The regular story mode final boss is a marathon run. Feels like it takes nearly 20 hits to kill this guy. The hardest part is surviving as long as it takes to actually take this guy down, because he has 2 entire phases and dying obviously has you restarting from the very beginning. It's a lot of trial and error and learning the pattern, and even after that, just figuring out how to survive until the final hit. Trip's final boss is equally complex with 2 entire phases, on top of requiring much quicker reflexes in my opinion. The biggest thing to avoid is this boss's insta-kill attack, which has no business existing, but this suffers from many of the same issues as the last one. The secret final boss also has all of the problems of the previous ones. It takes forever to kill, has 2 phases, has insta-kill attacks, and isn't immediately intuitive on what to do sometimes. But on top of all of that, you also have to worry about ring management. Because you're playing as Super Sonic, your ring count goes down every second. Oh, how convenient, because this guy loves taking his sweet time in between attacks. He just forces you to have to watch as your ring count slowly depletes. Again, this boss can take around 8 minutes or so to kill, which might not sound like a lot, but in Sonic time, that's an eternity. And it's super easy to mess up, so being like 8 minutes into the run holds some pretty high stakes knowing that it'll take you that long to get back there if you die. You can beat some of the levels in Sonic Forces like 10 times in that amount of time. The biggest issue for all of these Sonic Superstars bosses is definitely how long it takes to kill each one. That's truly the #1 thing that makes them so difficult. One small mistake can cost you minutes of playtime each. It's one of those terrible design philosophies of, oh, more HP equals harder difficulty. It just makes everything feel like a slog. I'd much rather the challenge come from tricky attack patterns, which these bosses do have thankfully. But that's on top of them being actual tanks, requiring way too many hits to kill in my opinion. I'm really glad Sonic Team is dabbling in harder difficulties, but maybe take some of these mistakes as a lesson to learn from for next time. The Titans from the Final Horizon and the last few bosses of Sonic Superstars are some of the hardest in the series, there's no doubt about that. So good luck to any brave soldiers attempting any of these bosses, or honestly any of the bosses on this list, you're gonna need it. Anyways, that's gonna be it for today's video. Like and subscribe if you liked it, and comment below what you think is the worst boss of the entire Sonic series. Huge thank you to my amazing channel members, and with all that being said, I hope everyone has a fantastic day. Peace.